You're alive? I feel like you're halfway to joining the cause. Also, not how new best friends should treat each other.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Invincible Season 3, Episodes 1, 2, and 3 video. They dropped all 3 just for the first day. It'll be 1 episode per week after this. They're setting up a couple really big arcs, but this is just the beginning. So if you're brand new to the channel, I'm doing videos for all the episodes just like previous seasons. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. Now everybody's going to be on Conquest watch. When is Conquest going to show up this season? I'm really not expecting him to show up till like the very end because they just spent the first 3 episodes teasing Invincible War, so I don't think we're even going to get to Invincible War till like the last couple of episodes. And all that stuff has to happen before Conquest shows up. Generally though, the show is moving into some of the bigger arcs that people have been hoping for, like especially comic book fans have really been wanting to see on screen for a long time. The title of episode 1 was You're Not Laughing Now is meant to be a reference to something that Doc Seismic says in this scene later in the episode after he captures all the heroes. Most of the titles for Invincible episodes are either direct lines that somebody said in the comics or the titles of the actual comic book arcs themselves. Sometimes they'll have the characters say those lines in the episodes, like lines of dialogue like they said in the comics. Sometimes they won't do that. Probably because they don't always want to be so quite on the nose with it. Like they don't always want it to be Leonardo DiCaprio memes every single episode. He said the name of the thing inside the thing. But the episode starts with Mark fighting Giant, who's literally an 8-year-old child trapped in the body of this giant monster. He was originally a regular kid from Earth who was transported to another realm by a wizard who cursed him into this giant form, used him against his enemies, and then eventually he got banished back to Earth, but he was still trapped in this giant form. Cecil literally calls it out too. Sorry about the kid because he is literally still a little kid, just in giant form. And we find out that Cecil was using Giant to help try and train Invincible up because he's been trying to get stronger and stronger since the end of Season 2. But it's also another good example of how Cecil tries to turn around villains and use them inside the GDA for his own benefit, which becomes a really big thing during the next episode. They have a much longer training montage for Mark, showing how his body has gotten stronger, more resilient, lasting longer in molten lava before taking damage, physically way stronger than Season 2, but he is still light years away from being as strong as someone like Omni-Man or like other Viltrumites like Conquest or even Thragg. You kind of see that over the first 3 episodes where like he still has trouble fighting some of the regular villains. But a big part of that too, and this gets into Oliver's storyline too with his powers developing, is that Mark has been holding back this whole time because he's tried to be a superhero and he doesn't want to be lethal, as opposed to Oliver, who's a little bit like Ender from the Ender's Game saga. Little kids not really understanding their limits, so they just go 100% red line every single time, Oliver using his full power every single time. Which is also a good way to show you how much Mark has been holding back this whole time. Like, he could be way more powerful, and he will have to be if he's going to fight people like Conquest. When he says he's going to need art to make him 20 new costumes because he's destroying this one so much, that's just foreshadowing for him changing to the blue costume in a couple episodes and Oliver getting his new costume. This time they do the title transition. It goes from blue to yellow with the colors reversing, meant to represent how his costume is going to change with his relationship with Cecil, the GDA just in general. Like everything's going to change. He's going to take a new path, break away from the GDA. They reference both Anissa and Conquest coming back, Cecil worried about the other Viltrumites in general too, which is meant to be long-term setup for eventually Conquest showing up first, but then eventually the Viltrumite War. Eventually there will be many Viltrumites that they have to worry about. But that's like endgame for the show. The Viltrumite War would be whatever their final arc winds up being. If they go to like Season 7 or Season 9, that would be the final season. These people stealing the Declaration of Independence are twins Dropkick and Fightmaster, played by Zolo from Blue Beetle and from the Cobra Kai series. They're actually time travelers from the future trying to fix their future from this brutal dictator. Without getting into spoilers, their storyline, the future timeline storyline, will be a big twist for Mark in what's happening in present day with a lot of the characters. We will see how quickly they do that storyline this season, but this isn't the last that you've seen of the two of them. I think this worker at the GDA that's communicating with someone about that attack is also from the future. When Invincible shows up with Rex, part of the irony here that you probably notice is that they look just like Rex. So because they're time travelers, I think the idea is they're meant to descend from Rex, so they're kind of fighting their grandfather. But the whole idea here is that they're not meant to be villains. They're actually trying to save the future, but in order to do that, they have to steal the Declaration of Independence, which is critical to the person they're trying to fight in the future. Without getting into spoilers, I don't want to get too deep into that. But that's why the twins look at each other and consider what they're about to do when they're thinking about fighting Rex and Invincible. Like, do we want to fight them? Like, well, they're not cops because they don't want to hurt any of the police. They don't want to hurt people. Their storyline is sort of like a Terminator Skynet situation where they're trying to prevent something bad from happening in the future. But it's not artificial intelligence or anything like that. It's just a Terminator-like storyline where there's this post-apocalyptic future they're trying to prevent. We will see when they wind up coming back this season. But while this is going on, Multi-Paul from the comics shows up to kill Rex. It is not connected to the twins. He showed up on his own, trying to get revenge from what he thinks is the death of his sister, Duplicate, blaming Rex, thinking that he was responsible, even though technically it was the Lizard League that killed her. And really, we know that she's not dead, because literally right after this, she shows up to stop the fight. Multi-Paul's powers are exactly like hers. They got their powers from a family curse. The big difference between them is that Multi-Paul works for an evil consortium called the Order that they talk about later in the series. We'll get to that in a second, but Duplicate broke away from them and tried to start using her powers to be a superhero. He's being voiced by Simu Liu, Shang-Chi from the Marvel movies. Back at home, you see how fast Oliver is growing, developing. His powers have already developed. His mind is also developing really fast because he's part Thraxan and their lifespan is so quick. What'll wind up happening, though, is eventually, as he grows to maturity, like he hits puberty, his aging will start to slow a little bit. He won't live quite as long as Mark, or say like Omni-Man, who's pure Viltrumite, but eventually his Viltrumite cells will overtake his entire body, and his skin will also change colors, and it'll look more like Mark in Omni-Man. Mark playing baseball with him is meant to be a reference to Omni-Man doing with him at the beginning of Season 1 when his superpowers had just developed. Basically, Oliver gets a speedrun version of Mark's arc in the first couple of episodes of Season 1 where his powers started developing and he started to learn to try and be a superhero. Immortal and Duplicate come back to the Guardians of the Globe. Everybody finds out what happened with her last season. Shrinking Ray also comes back to finally healed from the events of Season 2. Then they pay off the Doc Seismic teaser from earlier in the episode with him launching his attack all over the United States, capturing all the superheroes. Notice here how Cecil also more worried about Oliver's powers developing than he is about Doc Seismic. That's important for later in the episode when he has his big break with Mark. They have their big falling out. All because Cecil wants to have Oliver as a weapon if he can because he's worried about other Viltrumites showing up. This is part of the reason why he's been developing those Reanimen so many different times, upgrading them over and over again, making them more powerful. They set up Mark and Adam Eve's relationship, sort of setting the stage for them this season, but I think it's going to be slow going the way they bake this. Like, it takes a couple episodes before they actually start dating for real, and I think it'll be the end of the season before they're really, really close. Right as the crap starts to hit the fan, and then Conquest shows up, right after Invincible War. Her whole thing about going to school to learn architecture is so that she can learn to use her powers in a more fine-tuned way. Part of the idea is that she's actually one of the most powerful people on the planet next to Mark because of the way her abilities work. It's just that she doesn't fully understand how to use them to their greatest ability. Like, she needs to learn how to optimize her powers. And a big part of that is understanding things like architecture, physics, like just understanding the science of how things work. She can do way more complex things with her powers. She just doesn't understand how to do that yet. So her whole storyline of developing her powers is also similar to Mark's story of evolving his powers. They go to help the other heroes out to try and stop Doc Seismic. When Oliver overhears what's happening, it looks like he's playing a copyright-safe version of a Game Boy Advance. Robert Kirkman just saying, "Nintendo, please don't sue us." Nintendo, very litigious for any Nintendo YouTubers out there. When he tries to sneak away to help, his homemade suit is also right out of the comics because it's also exactly like Mark's first homemade costume. He basically designed it to look just like Mark's because he wants to be just like Mark. Then this scene here where Doc Seismic is lording over all the superheroes that he's trapped is meant to be the scene that they took the title of the episode from, where it actually says this line in the comics. Invincible, Adam Eve arrive, they banter about a bunch of storytelling tropes. This fight is also meant to show you how much stronger Mark has gotten and how much further he has to go because he still has a lot of trouble dealing with all these different creatures on his own. Cecil mentions Darkwing in the dark room and the drop pods. That's meant to be where he stores a lot of stuff he doesn't want anyone else to know about, like the Reanimen. He didn't want Mark to know about them, all because of the morality of the situation. They enter the fight, are actually pretty handy, but it sets up the falling out with Mark. Basically, the reason why Mark is so pissed off is because the Reanimen are essentially people. They used to be people, and Cecil has twisted them into cyborgs. But the way that Cecil justifies that is that they're corpses that were donated to the GDA. The other big side of that, too, is that D.A. Sinclair is a murderer, and he's basically using him for the GDA, which they set up with a lot of Cecil's flashbacks in episode 2, why he would eventually come to do stuff like this. Essentially, it's all because there's way worse stuff out there in present day that winds up being the Viltrumites, and Cecil's way more worried about that than he is about the morality of the situation. Like, he'll use any tool available to him to try and stop potential Viltrumites from coming and destroying Earth. And as part of that, he's also worried about Mark and Oliver because they're two Viltrumites on the planet, with the idea that he's kind of paranoid that they might go bad, so he needs a contingency against them that will work. And if it wasn't clear, they've been upgrading the Reanimen over and over again. They iterate every single time using more and more powerful corpses. They'll continue to do this, and they'll continue to get stronger and stronger with each new arc where you see them come back. Mark also super pissed off about Darkwing because he is a literal murderer, but the way that Cecil tries to justify that is that he's also trying to reform. Darkwing also tries to ask for their forgiveness too, like, I'm trying to change. But a lot of the intro in episode 2 with those criminals that try to reform but then fall back to their old ways also makes it sound like that something similar might happen to Darkwing, where he just starts straight up murdering people again eventually too. Cecil winds up taking Mark to the White Room, setting up their real falling out in this fight against the Reanimen, and during the post-credit scene, we get the rest of Omni-Man's conversation with Alan the Alien finally come back in the Viltrumite prison, who's trying to convince him to help the coalition of planets fight the Viltrumites, which will just last for a couple more episodes, and setting up their big prison break. They didn't say when they're going to try and bust out of this prison. There's more stuff going on here, like more characters they'll reintroduce. Battle Beast, for instance, is inside that Viltrumite prison, so he's coming back too. He'll be part of their big prison break. But this is just meant to be the beginning of the redemption of Omni-Man, like early days. The episode 2 title was A Deal with the Devil, which is another reference to something that's said in the comics that they reference with a lot of the characters in the flashbacks that Cecil has in the episode, with him basically making deals with these devils, bringing them into the GDA, like criminals that he's trying to reform and use as superheroes. The episode starts with a big Cecil flashback to explain his backstory and how he wound up running the GDA and how he wound up being the way he is in present day. He's a regular government agent and is subjected to the poison gas, which scars his face. He had most of his skin replaced, but left that one little part to remind him about how careless he got. Never again, he said, I'm never going to be careless like this, which is why he's so extreme in present day. These villains that he's fighting in the past wind up being Knucklebuster and Force Fist, the Order of the Freeing Fist, all meant to be parodies of the Iron Fist in the comics. And because Marvel is bringing back all those Marvel Netflix Defenders characters, like we've seen a bunch of Iron Fist Easter eggs already on some of the TV shows, we'll probably see a version of Iron Fist come back at some point. Jessica Henwick is also probably going to come back as her version of Colleen Wing at some point too. She actually said several years ago when they canceled the Iron Fist series, they were finally allowed to make jokes about fisting. So make all the jokes you want to, just because it sounds like they were walking around that set really sensitive about that topic. Knucklebuster and Force Fist seem kind of like Iron Fist parodies, but mixed with Daredevil colors. Like, can you make them look like Iron Fist, but change the colors to look kind of like Daredevil colors? This person in the hospital that comes to visit him is his predecessor Radcliffe, who ran the GDA before him. But after a time jump, the Serpent Society attacks their headquarters, revealing that Radcliffe has Knucklebuster and Force Fist working for the GDA now, just like Cecil eventually starts doing in the future. But in the past, Cecil is still very moral, like he takes Mark's position of hating this whole idea. He winds up killing them, getting thrown in prison. This time during the title screen transition, when it also flashes with the gray background, I think that might be a reference to both the blue costume that Mark gets and eventually the coming of Conquest with the gray, who shows up after he's been wearing the blue suit for a while. You could also look at that as a reference to the gray of Nolan's suit when he first shows up as Omni-Man before he's changed into his actual Omni-Man suit. In prison, they show that he's able to win over some of the inmates who treat him like a boss, setting up the big Rexplode backstory too. We're probably going to get another one-off episode set in the past for Rex eventually. There was actually a teaser they released last year where you actually saw Radcliffe with a young version of Rexplode, I think to tease the idea that they were going to do the Adam Eve thing where they gave him his own episode to explain that origin story. Part of the idea is that Radcliffe bought Rexplode from his parents, then experimented on him, gave him his powers that way, then tried to train him to be his own personal hitman, later then tried to get Rex to kill Cecil unsuccessfully. Rex wound up rebelling against him and then killing Radcliffe by charging up his glasses they would explode in his face. But the whole idea of the flashbacks are to give you Cecil's point of view in present day and how he evolves to that state, wind up being just like Radcliffe, basically repeating the line that Radcliffe gave him in the past. You can be the good guys, or you can be the guys who save the world, essentially. You can't be both. But I think the whole idea here, though, is that Mark is meant to be the answer to that, where he is the good guy and does eventually wind up saving the world. Like, he winds up doing both of those things. In present, they go back to Mark's fight with the Reanimen. He takes a bunch of them out, then Cecil reveals that he has developed a countermeasure with the inner ear weakness. This leads to their bigger falling out. He gets the Guardians involved, causing them to break up as well, too, all over the whole morality of the situation. When he winds up eviscerating all the Reanimen here, it's also meant to be a parallel for Omni-Man killing the Guardians of the Globe in episode 1, just like leaving their bodies all over the place. Robot then removes the inner ear device from his head, but that'll continue to be a big weakness potentially for him in the future. Basically meant to show you that even though Viltrumites don't really have an actual kryptonite, there are ways that you can actually fight them, things that they are weak against. When he talks with Adam Eve about what happened with Angstrom Levy last season, it's also meant to help set up the Invincible War later this season in the big teaser that we get at the end of episode 3. When half of the Guardians wind up quitting the team, Robot also makes the calculated decision because ultimately he thinks it's smarter to have Invincible on his side if anything bad ever happens in the future. And there are a number of different things that go bad for different characters. There's this future storyline that probably has something to do with that. We'll see how long they wait to completely pay that storyline off, or if they do that during this season, or if it spills into next season. Debbie finally goes on the date with that coworker that they were teasing last season. This whole part of her storyline wasn't really in the comics that much. She's not quite as big of a character in the comics, so they've expanded that for the runtime of the TV show. But a lot of this, I think, is just building up to the return of Omni-Man and what that relationship is going to be like when he does come back. Cecil puts Darkwing on the Guardians to start replacing their numbers, and the reference to him being on the Guardians again is because, remember, Omni-Man killed the original Darkwing when he killed all the original Guardians at the beginning of Season 1. Queuing up the next flashback showing you Cecil actually taking over the GDA in the past in the first time he ever met Omni-Man. This meant to be right after he came to Earth before he adopted the Omni-Man persona and started wearing that costume. Also showing you that Cecil never really trusted him, and they detected that he was lying immediately. Like, they clocked Omni-Man was not telling them the truth from the very beginning and just kept him on a very long leash. Like, we'll just watch him and see what he does for now, let him just uphold this lie, but we'll start developing our contingency plans and countermeasures for him right now. Cecil then ends the episode by repeating the line that Radcliffe told him in the past about not being so moralistic about what they were doing. The episode 3 title was You Want a Real Costume, Right?, which is a reference to Mark getting his blue suit from the comics and Oliver getting his first real superhero suit, which is also from the comics. Then they used the opening of this episode to basically give you a silent film about the tragic ending of these two supervillains that tried to reform and then fell back to their old ways after they'd fallen on hard times, and they treat it kind of like an actual silent film, like there's no dialogue, just music. When their story ends and they come back to dialogue, they reveal that Oliver is trying to help Mark out, like he's trying to sneak out and be a superhero. On the title screen this time, transitioning from the gray background to the red, I think is also meant to represent Oliver's suit because he gets a super suit and it is red, but also he's literally covered in the red blood of the Maulers for most of the back part of the episode. The whole scene of Adam Eve running into Amber, I think, is just an expansion of Adam Eve's storyline too, because they're not like super best friends or anything like that in the comics this way at this point. The comics actually got way past Mark's first relationship, way faster, and way into the relationship with Adam Eve, but the TV show is slow rolling that. We find out that the Guardians that just quit the team reopen the Teen Team's base. Shrinking Ray and Rex kind of act like they're gonna get together at some point too. When they talk about their traumatic backstories and Rex says he got sold for the price of a steak dinner, like I explained earlier in the video, he was sold to Cecil's former boss Radcliffe and turned into this weapon. Maybe we'll see his one-off solo episode, like his backstory episode, like Adam Eve, later this year. Robot jokes about this being his first time he's actually been here because his body was never physically here, he was always in some other tank somewhere else secretly. When they go back to prison, we see the two villains, Invincible and Oliver, just stopped passing by Multipol. We see Mr. Liu with Titan complaining about Multipol being in prison, explaining the whole order of it all to him because he took over Machine Head's empire and now he is part of the order responsible for this territory. Mr. Liu's whole power is that he can turn into a big dragon. He's meant to be a parody of Fin Fang Foom in the Marvel Universe. We'll actually see a big fight with him later this season. The Order is basically an evil organization of supervillains that Multipol works for. Machine Head also part of, like I said, they're kind of like the Injustice Society, or say like the Masters of Evil in the Marvel Universe. Then Invincible takes Oliver to get his first suit and his blue suit. The problem he runs into, though, is that Oliver was not around to see all the bad stuff Omni-Man did, which is why he doesn't understand why it's bad for him to walk around calling himself Kid Omni-Man, which is from the comics. Part of the other big thing here, too, is that anybody who's ever tried to talk to a little kid, like they just do not understand morality quite yet because their brains just have not developed to be able to understand that complexity. So even though Oliver is half Thraxan and he grows, he develops very fast, he's still just a little kid ultimately, which is why he doesn't understand a lot of the complexity of this. But because he's so OP, because of his Viltrumite powers, everybody is worried that he's just going to turn into another Omni-Man. When Mark makes the joke about being a little too serious with the blue costume, that feels almost like a little bit of a fourth wall break. They use the big prison break attack to give Oliver his next big fight to use for training. Kursk is an electric-based villain. He's meant to be a parody of Electro in the Marvel Universe. The power suit villain is called Furnace. He's meant to be a parody of what looks like the Iron Man Mark I suit. Things go pretty predictably. Oliver's still just trying to figure out how to actually be a superhero. He's just super jazzed up that he gets to use his powers and wear a costume. Adam Eve winds up moving back in with her parents to try and fix their relationship, all part of her trying to fix her really messed up childhood. There are a couple jokes about the news calling Mark Invincible, not realizing that he's just the same Invincible character in a different suit. This will also probably figure into the Invincible War too, with that twist, because you just have a ton of different versions of Mark that all look kind of the same, but not quite, in slightly different costumes. There'll be a couple ways that the show tries to differentiate between them so that you know who the regular Mark is at any given time, but there are a couple twists with that in the future of the comics too, so we'll see how they invoke that on the TV show. We get our first shot at the probe monitoring him and Adam Eve, and it winds up being Angstrom Levy, which is just more setup for the Invincible War later this season. They had that very ironic scene with the guards foreshadowing their own death when the Maulers bust in the same place that the Lizard League did last season, right after the dude says that this is the safest place on Earth. They try to steal a nuclear warhead, which is what the Lizard League also tried to do, setting up the fight with the Guardians and eventually with Invincible and Oliver in that big twist. But the whole point here, though, is to show you how Oliver just doesn't understand the morality of the situation, and he still uses 100% of his powers at any given time. He does not hold back like Mark does. So everybody press F to pay respects to the Maulers, RIP, not expecting them to come back from this. Don't worry, though, there are many other universes out there. There's still Angstrom Levy, there's still the multiverse, so there's other ways to bring versions of Maulers back on the show. But after Mark tries to have a talking to with Oliver, they want it to feel a little bit like his fight with Omni-Man during Season 1, except it doesn't actually escalate into a fight at that level. But because of the situation, Oliver is just going to need a whole lot of parenting and counseling, so I definitely feel for anybody watching this video who actually is a parent of young children, because this probably happens to you all the time, where you have to try to explain complex issues to your children, and they just do not get it because they are little kids. Debbie being the one to actually make Oliver really understand right from wrong is also a real big idea in the comics too, because she's also the reason that Mark turned out good the way that he did, and it's Debbie's influence that also helps to get Omni-Man to turn the corner too towards his redemption. Basically, the positive influence of mom is the reason why all these good things happen. It's all about just having a really, really good mom. But right as they're all coming together, Mark catches Angstrom Levy's probe without realizing that it is from Angstrom Levy, but revealing his secret base monitoring them, preparing to launch the Invincible War, which could either happen at the end of next week's episode or during next week's episode at some point, but I'm mostly expecting that to cover the back part of the season. They'll probably use multiple episodes for that though, because it is such a big comic book event. But because they dropped 3 episodes, there's so much foreshadowing for the next couple of episodes and for stuff even later in the arcs and future seasons. If there's any Easter eggs or references that you spotted that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. My full episode 4 video will post next week. It's going to be 1 episode per week for the rest of the season. The other big reminder is there's going to be a ton of Super Bowl trailers the next couple of days. I'll try to do videos for everything. Be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of that. Everybody click here for my new Fantastic Four trailer video, and click here for all my new Super Bowl trailers. I'll update the link as soon as I post all those. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.